Hello, my name is Tim Harris, and this is the start of what I'm going to make a playlist of videos that goes through the book by Greg L. Bahnsen on Van Tillian Apologetics. The book is this one here. It was published in 1998 by the P&R, Presbyterian Reformed Publishers. The author, Greg Bahnsen, died. He was a friend of mine. He died in late 1995, so this was his last book. And let me first just say a few sentences about what apologetics is and what I'm going to try to do with this series of videos, so that if you, the listener, have stumbled upon this by accident and you have no interest in the subject, you can bail out without further pain. On the other hand, maybe you've stumbled on this and you'll hear something that piques your interest and you'll want to stay around. So apologetics is essentially the defense of the Christian faith against unbelief. And the particular characteristic school known as Van Til's or Van Tillianism is a approach to apologetics that's in contrast to the most common popular forms. For example, in my generation, there was a popular sequence of books called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by, I believe, Josh McDowell. And this was an attempt to prove the Christian faith by looking at various evidences, the resurrection, especially, and maybe arguments about cosmology and so forth. In contrast to that, Van Til proposes a method that's more conceptual in nature and that claims to pull the rug out from under the unbeliever's position. Sometimes it's called a nuclear apologetic. And it's been extremely stimulating and edifying to my own development as a Christian thinker. And so I want to take this opportunity. Greg Bahnsen was the premier disciple, I would say, along with perhaps John Frame, of the Van Tillian school of thought, and so this would be a great book to get familiar with it. By the way, I have to hold this microphone here to get enough gain. I'll try to. I'm new to this business of making videos, so I'll try to improve the logistics, as time goes by. But so bear with me on this microphone waving around here. The approach that I'm going to try to take as we go through the book is twofold. First, reading, and then secondly, commenting. At first, I was going to read the entire book so that people that just like to listen to a book rather than read it, or that for whatever reason don't have the book but maybe would like to hear its contents, would have the ability to do so. But I now think that that's probably too much, reading at all. So what I'm going to do is read substantial portions, especially where the text is more clear than any summary could be. But then I'll probably summarize other sections in my own words, so that by listening to it, you'll get the entire content, but some of it verbatim, some of it by way of summary. Then the second aspect would be for me to stop and comment on different points that are made. And sometimes the comments are to clarify a word or a phrase that's not properly defined or adequately defined. Usually that's not the case. Greg was trained as an analytical philosopher, and so his organization is extremely organized and precise, and he builds up defining terms as he goes, but occasionally he lapses, and so I'll try to detect that and backfill. The other place where I'll offer commentary is areas where, in my opinion, there's conceptual weakness in his approach, and that can be divided into two types. One type of conceptual weakness is accidental, where, for instance, when he wrote, natural law theory and Thomism was not as popular as it's become in the subsequent 26 years. So he does address it, but not as thoroughly as perhaps he could have. I don't think it's due to any inadequacy of the approach to deal with natural law theory, but it just wasn't on the radar to the same extent that it is now. So that would be an example of like an accidental conceptual weakness that I'll try to backfill a bit. The other area where I'll offer commentary is where what you might say like an essential defect in the exposition, just due to perhaps the particular interests and blind spots that we all have. But I'll give a couple of examples. At times in Vantillianism, scripture is identified with the Word of God in a way that is premature, I feel, where the argument and the case could be made better by simply speaking more broadly of the revelation of God and deferring the question of Scripture downstream a bit. So when that happens, I'll try to point it out. Another very common mistake I feel is made in both Van Til and Bahnsen is referring to Reformed theology as if that's kind of an abstract system of thought that's kind of floating out there that anybody can kind of agree with or disagree with. Whereas the perspective I'm going to try to bring to the table is that the Reformed theology is the theology that emerged from the Reformed churches. So in other words, more of an ecclesiastical focus. And at times I think that does make a difference. And there's kind of two ways that I feel this does weaken the overall case. First of all, just what I said, it turns Reformed theology into some sort of abstract entity that you kind of like go into your ivory tower and either accept it or reject it, as opposed to being concrete and emerging from the church. And then the second area where I'll try to point out as we go along is that at times, the Reformed distinctive is unduly narrow. There's times when the same point could be made by Lutherans, for instance, or even Arminians at times. And so sometimes Reformed theology is appealed to in a way that I feel is not necessary. It's not Catholic enough with a small c. There are even times when I feel like the approach is consistent with the best of Catholic or Eastern Orthodox thought. So if you think of Christendom divided into Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholicism, and Protestantism, there's a couple other streams that I'm skipping by, but just sticking with the three main groups. And then within Protestantism, you have the Lutheran, the Reformed, and the Anglican branches. There are times when, Reformed is overly specific, and we share a perspective with Lutherans or Anglicans or even with all of Christendom. And so that's another characteristic theme that I'm going to try to bring out as we go along. So in doing that, I recognize that I'll be bringing kind of my own spin, my own characteristic take on Vantillianism, and that can be dangerous if you're just trying to learn what Van Til and or Bahnsen thought. But I think it'll be okay, because generally you'll be able to tell where Tim Harris is putting his ideas in there versus the purebred Vantillianism. And I think even with that danger, it can be helpful to hear a subject approached from different angles and even food for thought or discussion. It can actually aid the process of learning a new material. So I'm not really bashful about doing that. So I think that's enough of an intro. The book itself it's sort of self-introducing. So I think in the course of going through the early chapters of the book, the rest of introduction that's needed will be brought out inherently just in the course of discussing the book. So with that in mind, let's dive right in. Okay, I'll start by reading the foreword, which is signed by Richard Gaffin and Scott Oliphant on behalf of the Van Til Committee, because I think this gives a little bit of interesting historical background on the origin of the book. It reads as follows. Some years before his death in 1987, Dr. Van Til asked several colleagues and friends to watch over the legacy left by his writings. In partial response to that request, this informal Van Til committee decided to sponsor two projects, a Van Til reader of major size and an extensive bibliography of his writings. Over the years, changes have occurred in the composition of the committee, but its purpose and these goals have remained the same. The concern for a comprehensive bibliographic tool has been realized entirely outside the oversight of our committee by Eric Sigward in his producing the works of Cornelius Van Til, a CD-ROM. Many are indebted to Mr. Sigward for this valuable result of his tireless and self-sacrificing efforts, including the almost limitless search possibilities it affords. The idea for this reader came from the late Greg Bahnsen himself. When he approached our committee a number of years ago, we were delighted not only with his concept of the shape the reader should take, but with Dr. Bahnsen's interest in writing it. We believed him eminently, even uniquely qualified among Dr. Van Til's former students for the task. Dr. Bahnsen's busy schedule and difficult health delayed the book's appearance, but we are grateful that he was able to complete the manuscript shortly before his untimely death in December 1995. Our thanks to Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing for its commitment to this project, and to Dr. James Scott for his editorial assistance. Van Til, we believe, was a remarkable gift to the church. His thought continues to have unprecedented value for strengthening the church in its commitment to the whole counsel of God and for advancing its mission in the world. Our confident expectation is that this volume will prove effective both as an introduction to that thought and for promoting a deepening understanding of it. So I knew that when I talked with Greg in the last years, I knew that there was some committee, it was kind of nebulous, frankly, in our circles, but there was this committee that he was going to produce this book for, and that sort of explains a little bit of the missing link. So now continuing with the preface that is written by Greg himself, starting on page Roman numeral 17, reads as follows. Generations of maturing Christian pastors and scholars have benefited from the biblical fervor and intellectual rigor of Cornelius Van Til's teaching and writing, particularly in the field of apologetics, defense of the faith. It is my hope that the present volume will help further generations to share in the philosophical profundity and transforming power of Van Til's thought. A few things initially stand in the way of their doing so. The first is that Van Til authored a massive amount of material, some 30 books and syllabi, and over 220 articles, pamphlets, and reviews. Nevertheless, no particular publication expounds the essentials of his presuppositional method in one place systematically, pointedly, and with topical clarity. Even his key book, The Defense of the Faith, is, at many points, a compilation of segments of previous syllabi and articles arranged in a crisscross pattern of topics rather than a systematic and balanced unfolding of his apologetical approach in a discursive, practical, and readily outlined fashion. Some of the issues covered in it only weakly support the central purpose of the book, e.g. Chapter 14, Common Grace and Existentialism, while other especially helpful and pertinent discussions are not included, e.g. the analysis of the method of argument with unbelievers in Chapter 15 of A Survey of Christian Epistemology. Although he did not accomplish all that he would have liked, Van Til was a prolific writer of syllabi, surveys, articles, and books. The best self-contained summary of his view is My Credo, especially the concluding outline, The Total Picture. It is so compact, however, that one must already be familiar with Van Til's other works to interpret and apply it well. Thus, readers usually need to master a number of Van Til's writings in order to gain a general understanding of his system of thought. The second obstacle that readers encounter is Van Til's style of writing. Frequently, he used generalizations and passing allusions that presumed a thorough acquaintance with the history and development of Western philosophy, which most readers do not possess. He had a penchant for discussing issues and philosophers with abstract and sometimes vaguely worded principles. His surveys and summaries of positions or periods of thought could meander before reaching trenchant insights. His style could have been strengthened by more analytical, discursive, progressive, and precise developments of his assessments and conclusions. Footnote 6. John Frame notes, "But teaching the process of analysis was not Van Til's gift. Therefore, even today, there are many, both friend and enemies of Van Til's ideas, who have extremely confused notions of what he actually taught. The force of his bold, exciting summaries, illustrations, and exhortation is weakened by an inadequate definition, analysis, and argument." This is from the Handbook of Evangelical Theologians, edited by Walter Elwell. End of footnote 6. The organizing principles and particular expository manner of his longer publications are often of a diverse nature, i.e. hard to follow, or geared to historical surveys and analyses of individuals, which beginning students rarely find suitable. For instance, it is disappointing to find a book entitled A Christian Theory of Knowledge not working through the standard questions pertaining to the nature of knowledge. The book opens with themes of apologetical relevance, then turns to a lengthy and uneven historical survey, and later focuses upon selected individual writers, some of whom were already given such treatment in The Defense of the Faith. Likewise, the Reformed Pastor in Modern Thought begins with a discussion of Calvinistic apologetic method and then shifts to a historical survey of philosophers and theologians, with short synopses at some points and extensive discussions at others. A third hindrance is the actual content of what Van Til has to say. We find it strange to have our natural ways of thinking so thoroughly challenged and reformed. Because of the thorough changes they would require of us, revolutionary insights are often greeted with intellectual inertia or downright hostility. R.J. Rushdoony was surely on target when he said of Van Til, "His critique is directed to the presuppositions of thought with a radical thoroughness. This fact accounts for the nature of Van Til's influence. He either reshapes the thinking of those who come within his orbit or incurs their consistent opposition." And then finally, there's the ever-present difficulty that people have with thinking abstractly and using the special concepts and vocabulary of philosophy, particularly when Van Til's own terminology arises from the arcane parlance of a bygone generation of idealistic philosophers, e.g., principle of individuation, limiting concept, and concrete universal. This factor is occasionally complicated even further by the novelty of some of Van Til's own ideas, e.g. common grace as earlier grace, and his unusual use of terms, e.g. analogical. Sometimes a blessing can be a curse. Van Til was astute in using lively metaphors and illustrations, but sometimes his vivid rhetoric was troublesome to others. A need exists, therefore, for a volume that, in a supportive fashion, condenses, arranges, and clarifies the wide range of Van Til's writings that touch on apologetics. There is a welcome place for analyses of Van Til's creative and thoughtful contributions to other fields, e.g. theology, ethics, psychology, and history of thought. But the present work focuses specifically on his approach to apologetics. My aim is to expound the presuppositional method of defending the Christian faith by highlighting and explaining the distinctives of Van Til's thought, providing carefully chosen selections from his body of writings, and taking opportunity to correct certain criticisms that have been voiced. This book, then, is something of an anthology with running commentary. My hope is to make presuppositionalism readily understandable to readers who want an introductory exposure to Van Til in his own words, and who are not specially trained in philosophy, but who are willing to read and reflect upon basic issues pertaining to knowledge and Christianity at more than an elementary level. Because this is intended as an introductory exposure, not an advanced text for specialists, it will not delve into deeper or technical philosophical issues pertaining to Van Til's thinking and method, nor will it extensively examine possible ambiguities or difficulties that could benefit from clarification or correction. This book is an organized digest of what Van Til taught throughout his various publications about the underlying approach to apologetics. After an introductory sketch of the basic themes that drive Van Til's apologetic and a survey of his life, the book lays out his conception of apologetics and offers a simple description and illustration of his presuppositional method. We then explore and explain in more detail the relevant epistemological and psychological issues that bear on Van Til's way of defending the faith, culminating in a discussion of the transcendental argumentation that he endorsed, set in contrast to the more traditional ways of using theistic proofs and empirical evidences. A few of Van Til's opponents are examined before his outlook is summarized in the conclusion. It will be beneficial for the reader to stay in touch with and remain aware of the flow of thought in the book, especially since certain discussions are somewhat lengthy and the analysis is interspersed with blocks of readings. The progression of thought can be scanned by looking at the development of chapter sections and the topics of the Van Til readings, which are listed in the analytical outline at the front of the book. I would suggest that the reader can most effectively learn and understand the thrust of Van Til's approach to defending the faith if he keeps referring back to this outline in order to grasp the significance of what he is reading at any particular point within the overall scheme. A quick sidebar, I'll try to find a way to communicate the analytical table of contents with a screenshot or link or something as I get more expert at how to do this type of presentation, some future video. Each section begins with a brief discussion of the announced topic. Selected readings from Van Til then follow the introductory discussions. The titles for the excerpts are my own. The readings are accompanied by explanatory commentary or footnotes, transitions, and occasional responses to critics. And the rest of the preface is chiefly acknowledgments, as well as some of his editorial conventions that he uses in the text that we don't need to go through in detail. But I'll list the names that he acknowledges and gives thanks for. John Frame, Richard Gaffin, Virginia Bahnsen, Randy and Marinelle Booth, Lon Oswalt, Joseph Bell, and his assistant, Michael Butler. And his concluding paragraph then says, and finally, although he is now in a better place, I would publicly acknowledge my debt to Cornelius Van Til for the hours of rewarding personal discussion, fellowship, and instruction he shared with me years ago, as well as the gracious confidence he expressed by inviting me, while a student at Westminster Seminary, to assist him in his scholarly labors and lecture in his stead when he was ill. I learned much from his words as well as from his walk. Thus the preface to the book. So I'm going to stop this first video with that. Next time we'll dive right into chapter 1. Like I said, hopefully I'll get these logistic issues addressed one by one, but like Chesterton said, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. So we'll go from there.